Good morning, everyone. From wherever, or good afternoon, or good evening, from wherever in the world you're dialing in from. Um, Thank you for attending today's session on building universal standards for digital infrastructure resiliency. My name is Jeannie Gan, and I am the Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy from Kaspersky, and I'm your moderator for today. We're here today to discuss the challenges and opportunities of securing the backbone of a modern digital economy, our critical infrastructure, including data centers, cloud services, and other foundational digital assets. Of course, we all know that cybersecurity and resilience of critical information infrastructure, CIIs, have become well-established requirements over the years. However, as the digital landscape evolves, we actually need to broaden our focus to include not only the security of information and data, but also the physical and operational resilience of the digital infrastructure that house these information and data. So when we started conceptualizing this workshop early this year, we were using an example of how an outage of a major data center in Singapore actually disrupted 2.5 million banking transactions across Singapore's largest banks, Citibank, DBS, to show how vulnerabilities in digital infrastructure can have far-reaching consequences, even when it's not triggered by any cyber attacks. But of course, its close linkage to cybersecurity was not immediately obvious as well. Yeah. And then in July, everything all changed when a rogue software update by a US-based cybersecurity company led to the crippling of up to 8.5 million computers worldwide, which were using Microsoft systems. And suddenly, many people realized how resilience requirements which apply in the cybersecurity industry could apply to digital infrastructure. Um, and governments around the world were beginning to recognize this even before the incident. For instance, Singapore is studying the introduction of a Digital Infrastructure Act going beyond cybersecurity to address a broader set of resilience risks, ranging from misconfigurations in technical architecture to physical hazards such as fires, water leakages, and cooling system failures. The UK government from the other part of the world also has launched um, a public consultation on enhancing the security and resilience of its data infrastructure. And these developments mark the beginning of a global shift towards more comprehensive frameworks for digital infrastructure resilience. So, well, since conversations in this area are still pretty new, and early stages. I think we're in early stages, right? And there is a chance for the IGF to sort of shape some best practices and common standards. That's our goal today, to brainstorm ideas. And really, we have today with us speakers from around the world from different regions. And we hope to brainstorm ideas that will help shape the future of digital infrastructure best practices. We have regulators as well, industry leaders and experts from academia to discuss these critical issues and collaborate on creating a white paper that we hope to produce at the end that will serve as a reference for countries developing laws and regulations to strengthen digital infrastructure resilience. Right. So let me now quickly introduce our speakers after this context setting. First of all, I think I'll start from my right. On the far end, we have Ms. Adoranke. She is head of public of policy and process review, corporate planning, strategy, and risk management department at the Nigerian Communications Commission. She'll speak about the role of national cybersecurity and digital infrastructure governance, particularly in Nigeria. And then I have Major General Dr. Pawan Anand, who is Director of United Service Institution of India and a PhD guide and mentor at the National Defense College. He will share insights from India, focusing on the challenges and threats to digital resilience, particularly in rapidly developing countries. And on my left, that's Ms. Ala Abdulal. She is Chief of Digital Economy Foresight at the Digital Cooperation Organization. She'll discuss the role of the DCO, Digital Cooperation Organization, in shaping and enhancing digital infrastructure both in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and internationally. Right, so for today, we will explore several key topics throughout, focusing on three main themes. First, threats to digital infrastructure. We'll discuss the latest threats to digital infrastructure, their economic and social impacts, and how different countries are responding with new standards and regulations. And of course, the second theme will be multi-stakeholder collaboration, which I think it's a running theme as far as the UN and IGF context is. We'll encourage the exchange of expertise among all stakeholders, government, industry players, academia, and all that. And of course, lastly, we'll talk about the regulatory and standards development, focusing on the importance of international standards for digital infrastructure, particularly, and examine how best practices from cybersecurity can be adapted to this domain. Right? So let's kick off with some initial thoughts from our panelists. I'll ask each of you to provide maybe a brief impulse statement, not more than 2 minutes, based on some following questions. Maybe we'll start with Aderonke. So Ronke, in your opinion, is digital infrastructure a universally accepted term? And could you also maybe give us a brief overview of the role of Nigeria's NCC in digital infrastructure resilience?
Thank you, Jeannie. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Kaspersky, for sponsoring this conversation. I'd like to start by saying that this topic is timely, considering that it has a lot of interplay regarding development of standards, corporations, and what have you. In the course of reviewing this topic, across a statement by Sharon and Karen Rudler, some sociologists. And what did they describe infrastructure as? It struck me. It says infrastructure was described in a provocative manner as something that remains invisible until it's broken down. So let's just look at the picture. We all wake up this morning, our emails are not sending, we can't connect, people cannot even see us all over the world. We can't do any transactions. I'm sure everybody will go like, what's happening here? So that's the perspective. Infrastructure as the bedrock is the underlining framework for digital connection. So having said that, looking at is digital infrastructure universally accepted? I think that's yes. It's a universally accepted term because when you look at different organizations, the ITU sees it as an enabler for provision of digital access. The OECD reviews it as an so for social economic development. In Nigeria, can you hear me?
Sorry, give me a moment. I think we need some help here. Ronke's audio is coming on and off. Can we maybe switch a mic for her, please? Or we can let maybe you use that first.
So is it off?
No, it's not that. It's.
Can you hear me?
I think you use that mic first. Just let me switch that up for you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now it's okay. Yeah. Please.
Okay.
Now it's good. Yep.
All right. So do I start all over again or just continue from the Nigerian perspective?
Yes, just a Nigerian
So as a
perspective.
regulator, I work for the Nigerian Communications Commission, and we are the regulator for the telecoms communications industry in Nigeria. Basically, we oversee the technical and economic regulation of the industry. And coming from the perspective of digital infrastructure, the commission was established by an act of the parliament, and we have amongst various powers or functions to facilitate an enabling environment. One of the things we are looking at is promoting digital infrastructure. We have various actions or interventions that we have taken, such as providing licenses for infrastructure development, either operational spectrum licenses. We also currently in Nigeria, we have our Cyber Security Act 2025. And part of what was identified was the critical national infrastructure, and digital infrastructure was part of what was identified. Portion to this, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Portion to this, a critical national information infrastructure order was lately or recently launched. What is it looking at? It's because we have identified as a nation the importance, the sensitivity of the infrastructure. I believe, in my opinion, that we have moved beyond cybersecurity to cyber or infrastructure resilience. Is the ability for us to bounce back if there's any attack. Jeannie did talk about the Singaporean experience, but if you also cast your mind back earlier in the year, and the SG, ITU did mention it about the submarine cable cut. It affected a lot of countries around the West African coast. But the good thing was Nigeria, and I would give kudos to my organization. We had always been proactive in our regulations, and we made sure that our operators had, you know, resilience in their network. Risk management is something that for, and also we ensure that they have redundancy in network. How do they survive if there's any attack? So for Nigeria, we did not really feel the impact, but the West African coast did have their internet connectivity shut down for a while. And Nigeria has 8 submarine cables landing in its shore. So you can imagine the amount of
Yeah.
data network structure that we have. And the ITU also acknowledges that, say, nothing less than 90 or let's say 80 to 90% of data connectivity is carried on the submarine cable internet connectivity and all of you. And because of this, the Commission Nigeria is passionate about ensuring the resiliency. So we are also part of the working group that was established by ITU. The Honorable Minister of Communications from Nigeria is a co-chair for the corporation to work on developing standards for these people. As in me, developing universal standards for digital infrastructure, for me, it's something that it's timely. It is expedient for us to look at it holistically. And we have pockets, national, like I mentioned, experience. We also have regional and group interventions. But like the SDG or what the is doing, I'm not sure we have something that's universally means everyone. So well done to Kaspersky for sponsoring this. And I think it's a conversation that is timely. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronke. In fact, in your very short impulse statement, you've already touched on all three themes. You've discussed the threats to digital infrastructure, and I love the submarine cables example that affected the West Africa. That was a fantastic illustration, actually, and also about the some multi-stakeholder collaboration and efforts already. So maybe I'll now turn to Ala. So the DCO, as we all know, plays a significant role in shaping and enhancing digital infrastructure internationally. So could you perhaps take a couple of minutes and share the goals of your organization in this area and what efforts are being made in addressing digital infrastructure resilience. So switch it on. Yes, we can hear you now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be a part of this panel with you all. So the Digital Cooperation Organization, just to start, we represent 16 member states, having an 800 million of population. And our goal overall is to make sure that every person, nation, and business has a fair opportunity to participate. As you have said, Jenny, now we are in a world of digital economy is accelerating very quickly. So our organization really focuses on giving that fair opportunity for everyone to be part of this growth of the inclusive digital economy. And for that, we have mentioned now, and even my colleague here mentioned how important is it to have the right infrastructure and have access to that infrastructure from businesses, from governments. And what we are doing at DCO is that we are promoting the use of having the development of resilience framework, those specifically in the response of the increasing risk that is coming on the digital infrastructure. We are giving guides and advices to all our member state, putting all the stakeholders on one table. So what happened during what you have mentioned in July, one of the fastest response that we have done is that we gathered all our member states on one table to discuss the issue that has happened with the faulty deployment and the outage, and how did it impacted each and every nation. What was their lesson learned? What can we do together? What are some of the missing regulations in some of the countries that can be shared? And this is why, and we are the Digital Cooperation Organization. We believe in the cooperation, and we believe that also it should be in a multi-stakeholder approach. Also looking not only at infrastructure, because again, infrastructure is one layer, but even as you have mentioned, we have services, operations that are running those infrastructure. Okay, do the people have the right skills and capacity to be educated to run those infrastructure with the advancements of different technologies? Now, when infrastructure is varying from supercomputers that are supporting AI, that is even bringing different layer of risks. So by focusing on providing the right information, by putting all the right stakeholders and bringing countries together, we are aimed and focused to really enhance the digital infrastructure of our member states and even contribute globally to all countries.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. I like the point that you made about infrastructure being overlaid with systems and then, of course, capacity. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about capacity building later, because that's the human element too.
Definitely.
Yeah. So now I'll turn to Major General Pawan. From your experience, what are the main threats and challenges to digital resilience, particularly in India and other leading economies?
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Kaspersky, for getting us all together on this interesting subject. So, well, to my mind, firstly, I'm from the USI, the United Service Institution of India, and we do a lot of emerging technologies work with the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, the National Security Council, Ministry of Electronics and IT, the Ministry of Internal Affairs or Home Affairs, and of course, with the Defense and the Defense Cyber Agency. It's actually interesting that India today is in every conversation that takes place globally on anything to do with digital, because India has gone deeply digital. And with the Honorable Prime Minister of India offering the DPI, the Digital Personal Infrastructure, for almost all the global South countries. Literally, India seeks to help the global South in coming up with their DPI. So that having been said, what's the main threats and challenges that we are looking at? And I would start with the main thing, and that is sovereignty of data. And everything hovers perhaps around that. Uh, you may have all your infrastructure in place. You may have the storages. You may have the transit points. You may have the networks. You may have the processing infrastructure. But at the end of it, it's the data which really counts. That's the thing that makes the mayor go. If money makes the mayor go, it's data that makes the mayor go here. Data sovereignty, to my mind, is something that we really need to keep in mind, and India is very cognizant of that. We are, of course, would like to have all our data onshore in India, which perhaps is not totally possible at this minute because we don't have the entire capacity to be able to store that kind of data. So obviously, much of it is offshored. And when it's offshored, and if we don't have the capacity to keep the data, we don't have the skills, as Ala had brought out, as yet, we would be looking at the legal implications of keeping your data offshore. And that's something that the DPDP Act that we've come out with in 2023 really looks into. And I'll come to that sometime later in our conversation. The second most important thing is integrity. So we have to look at integrity of data in storage and integrity in transit. Both of these are very important to us because wherever the interfaces happen, wherever there is a joining of networks, wherever there is a joining up with the storages, that is the point where we find vulnerabilities occur. So as your digital penetration increases in India, the contact surfaces increase and the attack surfaces increase. And I think the final point that I'd like to make quickly is that when it comes to emerging tech, AI in cybersecurity begins to get more and more important for us. So the ethical use of AI and also the responsible use of AI is so important. We would look at accountability wherever AI is used, whether it is for cyber or for protecting infrastructure physically or digitally. We would have to look at interpretability as well, because you should be very clear as to what exactly is coming out of that and how it is protecting your infrastructure. I think also what we'll have to keep in mind is supply chains. And we'll talk about that later, but supply chains could be compromised. And that is one huge threat that we need to keep in mind. Today, at the end of it, with all the infrastructure that has come up, DPI that has come up in India, we have now become the 10th most vulnerable country in the world to digital assets. And I see that coming up further and further. And you can make out also by the increase in the number of cyber attacks. Maybe I could give out those figures, but that's pretty obvious that the number of attacks are going up geometrically every year. So I pause here and come up with some more thoughts later on.
Thank you. Thank you. When you say top rank number 10, I think what came to my mind was that this is really the kind of ranking we don't want to top, right? But thank you all for your thoughts. I think it's time for us to turn to the moderated discussions. Yeah. We do have a set of policy questions that we will like discussed today and to explore with our speakers. So please, however, feel free to jump in if you've got thoughts to add on to whatever that the other speakers are saying. But of course, please help me to keep your interventions concise and short. Yeah, not more than 2 minutes, maybe. So first, maybe I'll get Ronke to take a first question. Do we need universal standards of resilience, or is it the case that every country's digital infrastructure has unique needs that require a customized approach, right? So how should we balance these two perspectives of having something universal versus something that's highly customized? What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Okay. So for me, universal standards is not negotiable. I think it's something that's meant to be open and something that needs to be adopted. Like I did say earlier on, you can start from the regional level. So like what we've done in Nigeria, I will use my national perspective, and maybe because we also boast of the largest economy in Africa, our numbers speak, our economies speak, especially our interventions when it comes to development of digital infrastructure in Africa. So back to universal standards. Yes, we do need one. What we have also done in Nigeria is to come up with the Critical National Information Infrastructure Order. It outlines strategies, methods, or will I say activities or actions by several stakeholders on how to tackle. When General Powen was speaking, he did talk about the physical protection of infrastructure. We have our own vulnerabilities back home, issues regarding vandalization of structures and all of that. So when you look at it from that perspective, you drill down, you need to look at how you protect that. And you move from the national to the regional. How do we come up with KPIs, standards? What works for Nigeria may not work for Ghana because of our peculiarities, but you cannot undermine that. The reason why all of us are here in this room is because the infrastructure, digital infrastructure matters to us. And we've identified the need to see how we can continuously sustain it. So that's the conversation around the room, whether it's services or whether it's what have you that runs on the infrastructure. So you move from regional and we look at the universal perspective. Like I did say, the ITU is already working on something, the submarine cable resiliency, just to guide against what happened. Singapore had probably come up with their own solutions, and the DCO also is that sharing experiences. So in summary, for me, it's from home growth to regional and universal. And at the universal level, I would like to liken it to the SDG. It can be adopted amongst all nations, and the churn would definitely go back home. So when you say, you talked about, does it require different approach?
Yeah.
Implementation may require different approach, but the standards can be global. And this conversation, like you did say earlier on, probably develop a white paper, and not all of, but about adopting, having more stakeholders, especially policy level, to look at it critically and see how we can run with it. Thank you.
I like that response. Thank you for putting it across so elegantly, because really standards can be universal and they need to be. It's like what we have at the UN with the SDGs. Indeed, I think that's a pretty apt parallel that you've drawn. But of course, drawing experiences at the regional level and also having implementation localized. I think that's excellent. I think that has helped us to set the stage. I'm not sure if other speakers have anything to add. Dr. Pawan?
Yeah. Uh, I, I totally agree with what Adaronke said. I mean, she really built it up, from bottom to top, and took the whole width of the subject. But I just want to add here that when we talk about universal standards, standards would be something that we should all be should be all able to take on, because if we don't do that, we would be not able to connect globally. So those universal standards, I think, are so important. At the same time, when it comes to bringing in regulation, I think we'll need to be a little careful. So while we set standards, we will have to be careful about compliances, and we need to differentiate between the two. Because the moment you bring in compliances and those compliances become too stringent, then there is a fear of stifling innovation. So we need to find that balance between compliance and innovation, and we need to differentiate between standards and compliances.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those remarks. I am going to move, I'm going to ask maybe Allah a next question. Um, what do you think are the biggest challenges in adopting universal resilience standards that we have been talking about for the most part, especially in developing regions? How can we make sure these standards are accessible and scalable in different parts of the world? If you could maybe draw some experiences from working in DCO. Thank you.
I think we have a lot of challenges in that, several key challenges, from economic and technological disparities between countries, different countries. So let's look at it, and even it has been mentioned by my colleagues here. Different countries have different level of readiness. Some of them even at a stage that they lack infrastructure by itself, not only having it resilience enough. And this goes to having lack of financial support and technological support. Another aspect is also talked about it when I mentioned in my key or first opening, which was capacity building. Again, for a country to start adopting standards, are they ready for those standards? Do they have the right human capital to understand the standards, to apply them, to make sure that they are customized in the right way? Again, um, definitely, it's very useful to have a framework and standards for everyone to adopt. But again, there will never be a one size fit all. There will be a need of cascading to the needs of the country, to their status. But it's very good to have that solid foundation that unifies everyone. And this is why having those right human resources and experts is very crucial on a national level, which will really make sure that it's being adopted in the right way and implemented in the right way. Another aspect, one of the challenges is, as I said, is those standards flexible enough to fit the current status of that country? What is the flexibility of those standards? And maybe another aspect, that one of the challenges is currently every country is tackling this challenge by their own, even from only a government perspective, not looking at, okay, what can the private sector provide, what can the academia provide. Again, academia can provide a lot of research on and understanding of those standards in coming up with the right ways. Are we putting all those people on the same table? Are they having the conversations? Is it a government approach, or is it a multilateral approach, a multi-stakeholder approach? I think all of those challenges is being in the way of us, first of all, having the right standards in place, to adopting them, and then even measuring their impact and the way that they are executing.
Thank you. You have covered several very good points. Again, I think we are seeing this recurring issue or question to do with the human capital and their ability to appreciate the issue, apply the standards, and of course, to rightly implement them in a way that makes sense in their home countries.
And even let me add, because
Please, yes.
there is a very important point until we all reach that universal standard, okay? Things are accelerating very quickly. Are those standards are agile enough?
In
Are
fact,
they
too fast.
Exactly. We are talking about AI. We are even now talking about quantum computing.
Yes.
Again, this is adding another layer of complexity from a security perspective, from an infrastructure perspective.
Yes.
Again, until we reach that agreement on those are the universal standards, we will be in another point of era
I know.
that we need to make sure that this is another layer of challenge that we really need to start thinking of to move fast. Can
Yes.
we build something that is agile enough
Yeah.
to take that very fast advancements that we are
Yeah.
moving in?
It's great that you point this out because Dr. Pawan and I were just having a chat yesterday after hearing some sessions in the opening segment of the IGF. And we're just saying that, shortly after this whole global digital transformation movement, and then we have got AI, and now already we're into quantum computing. It's like we're trying to play catch up all the time. And I think that is definitely a theme that we need to come back to about how we can seek to remain agile and fast enough to respond to have standards or laws or policies that actually respond to real issues, real questions that are evolving faster than we would like. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
Yeah, I totally agree. It's all the time a game of catch, and most of us uh, would agree on some points, and we would have disagreements in some areas. And I think the solution lies in quickly reaching the places where we have consensus, um, and issue them as some sort of a guideline, or at times even as a regulation where we all agree. And then we can keep resolving what we don't agree upon. So I think when we come together to talk about these issues, we need to be very clear. Where is it that we've quickly found a consensus? And let's start implementing that as quickly as possible. And the rest we will work on. At the same time, when we're working on those, the difficult areas where consensus is a little more difficult, we need to bring in the new technologies also that start influencing. So perhaps that is the only way that we can remain in the picture. Otherwise, compliances will always, or consensus will always be so far behind.
And they really like the word we. You have meant we have to work together. We have to agree because yes, it's not one person or one nation or one
yes.
country. I think it is the core of it is that we are working together on it.
And I also like how he says we just need to get started. Yeah, let's just stop talking about this and let's just do it. All right. Since so I just want to stay with Dr. Pawan, and I would like to ask the next question. How can governments be equipped in digital resilience? What policies, regulations, and codes of conduct, as you may like to put it, need to be adopted to ensure a secure infrastructure across healthcare, governments, finance, CIIs, and data centers?
So that's really a tough one because when you formulate policy, you have to take so much into consideration. And just to tell you how tough it's been in India, but it's been a very sure-footed move. We came up with the DPDP Act, and we started talking about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act in 2016.
Yeah.
We finally came out with drafts in 2022. It was given out to the public. There was blowback.
Yeah.
There was a lot of feedback. They went out with the second bill. That was about 6 months later. There was a bigger blowback. And finally, the DPDP Act came into existence in the mid of 2023. It may have been late, but it was there and it's for sure. It is yet to be fully operationalized because there are certain rules which are being worked out, and there are about set of 20 to 22 rules which are going to come into place. So it just gives you a sense as to how you go about making policies with keeping in mind various stakeholders throughout the country and abroad. So, but I think what really gave us a big boost across the globe was that COVID-19 gave us all a real wake-up call because we all went digital, and suddenly all of us realized that we need to have certain policies in place where we are able to converse digitally and, of course, transfer data digitally. We've seen how it's impacted public services. We've also seen to the extent how it's started impacting elections as well. So during COVID, there were certain elections in Europe which had to be postponed. Even the US and India elections, which were held later on, were impacted somewhat by this kind of digital interventions which were happening and the influence that it played. Yeah, I think how you can strengthen the policy structure for this is, you have a digital first approach for public services. So this needs to be built up with almost all within the country and outside the country. We also need a remote enabled kind of a structure in our policies so that everybody is able to work somewhat remotely and that it is controlled. Of course, everybody needs to give a higher priority to digital infrastructure. So with these three in, connectivity between various digital infrastructures would bring us into a complete picture. So policy has to hover around all of these. Not to forget what we spoke earlier, physical protection of our digital infrastructure. So we have to look at the housing of the infrastructure underground, a distributed infrastructure, how to protect it physically, how to it's not disrupted, how to ensure it's not interdicted physically. And then, of course, during transit. And finally, I think we need to look at third-party risks and how these will be managed as technology innovations take place. So all in all, policies will have to be whole of government. Now, when it comes, let me just take two examples and to bring out the difference. The United States has, in healthcare, has those guidelines for HIPAA. And these are very stringent guidelines which have been brought in for various healthcare, for protection of healthcare digital information. On the other hand, they also have the SSA 18, where they have certain reports, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 reports, where these are standards by which you would expect certain reporting to happen in financial transactions. Now, in India, we are very clear that we follow the SSA guidelines. And so our reporting in SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 is fully in place. So we expect all financial transactions to be fully transparent, to be fully controlled. On the other hand, when it comes to healthcare, and the US has the HIPAA, India has come out with its own standards, and that is, we call it DISHA, basically digital infrastructure in healthcare. But it leaves a lot of space open for data to be utilized. So you can't have a universal standard as per us in that, but we would say that we've left a lot of space open for data to be utilized for research. So we don't mind our data being used for research, but private data has to be kept in place. So it's a little more nuanced, if you ask me. And that is the kind of nuance that we need to have so that we are able to utilize digital infrastructure and data to its fullest for innovation. Yeah, back to you, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think just one point of clarification, when you talked about third-party risks, you're basically talking about different people in the ICT supply chain, right? Okay, cool. Now,
Jeannie?
I think questions are coming. Yeah, please. No, I'm just gonna say that questions are starting to come in, but I think let's go with the flow. I quite like the flow. Please, Adoranke. Yeah.
I just wanted to add 1 or 2 points to what General Pawan said when it comes to
Yes.
how governments needs to be equipped with developing policies regarding digital resiliencies. So for me, I look at it as sometimes people may see resiliency as being subjective, based on levels of development and technology or infrastructure availability. In some cases, issues of topography, weather, may also serve as a point of focus for us to consider because you did talk about the physical protection underground. How do we store this infrastructure? Some places it's nearly impossible. It's a Herculean task for the infrastructure to be protected, talk less of being resilient. Then also for the Nigerian perspective, because I'm a regulator, we've come up with various policies. We have a Nigerian National Broadband Plan that helps us to fashion out stages, phases on how to ensure integrity, resiliency, recovery plans, standards for infrastructure across the country. Then, like I did say, the Critical National Infrastructure Information Order did engage or gives plan for various stakeholders. I recall you did say is the private sector aware, the academia, all those are also included. It's a model maybe for a national level, regional, or even other countries that may want to look at it. If we say we're looking at or developing standards, we were that proactive. And I also want to say perhaps that's part of what gave us that resilience, so to speak, from the submarine cable breakdown or cut. And then, yeah. So for regulations as well, we keep doing catch up. It's a cliche, but is this
Yes.
something that we want to look at? Can we get to a level where you will start considering standards or policies or regulation that can be self-regulated? Maybe we come up with soft laws as regulators, thinking outside the box to speak to these global standards that or universal standards we're looking at, rather than put in laws or regulations like General Powell did say that stifle innovation.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
Yeah, please,
I
please.
think there is one important point also that I want to build upon because it has been mentioned. Again, we cannot protect ourselves and be 100% resilience. But we, as a country and even internationally, we always have to have like the right response plan for those such emergency. Yes, every country they have their recovery plans, incident response plan, but even I believe from an international level or even sometimes on a regional level, we really need to have that set up in the right way for to have that يعني, immediate exchange of experience, immediate exchange of what did this country do to come back or recover from a specific incident. I think this is a very important point that we should consider, specifically if we are talking about government being digitally resilient.
And when you talk about the exchange, let me just clarify what you mean is that cross-jurisdictional learning
Exactly.
and that communication that takes place, I presume, effectively through platforms such as DCO. Right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
other organizations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's great. Yeah, thanks, Allah. Now there is actually, I know I'm sort of messing up with the order a little bit, but it's really just to maintain that flow because we have a comment from a member of the audience. I'm going to read it, and then I have a small question, which I may want to pose it to Allah. So the comment comes from Vahan from RIPENCC, and he says, coming from different sessions at IGF, there is a feeling that we still don't have a universal understanding of what is this DPI. I think Dr. Pawa mentioned DPI. Yeah. Yeah. Neither the universal approach to what is a core, technical core, or public core of the internet. To develop standards, we should use the same language and have a universal agreed definition of these terms. So let us start from internet and define what is important for us, what is a core, and how we can protect it and ensure the resilience of it. So I think what he's really talking about is to have a common language that we speak when it comes to this topic. So my question is really, how can we begin to shape this common language? Any insights? Maybe Allah can start. Yeah.
Yes, definitely, and I totally agree with his comment. And before I answer this question, let me give you our challenge at
Yes.
DCO when we started. Our organization is focused on digital economy, and when we first started, okay, what is the definition of digital economy? Is a universal understanding of what does it mean? What does it encompass? So I totally agree with him. Is that the first point is that to define and put in a framework what the understanding of what we are trying to solve. This is the first, let's say, ABC in any even research. When you start conducting a research, you really identify what is the question that you want to answer, what is the scope, what is in the scope, what is outside that scope. So, and for us to reach that, we need to sit together, as it's a problem that
yes.
we need to solve. Because again, I can come up with my own definition, that you can come up your own definition and understanding, but then what is the whole purpose?
What is the
of this?
mischief?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we really need to bring all the stakeholders from government, private sector, academia, on different region, on different countries. And I believe this is the role of, for example, our organization and other organization, where we can bring those all of the stakeholders in one table to start defining the definitions of what do we want to solve, and then putting an action plan to actually come up with different solutions.
Yeah, just wanted to add to this. I think it's a fair point, which has come from the person who made the comment. But when it comes to digital infrastructure, I think a reasonable amount of definition is in place, especially the technical definitions are, I think, across the globe quite reasonably understood by all. Probably where the difference comes in is when you talk about policy, and there the cultural difference begins to play. So there may be a few issues where the lexicon needs to be clarified in some cases when it comes to policy. But on the tech side, I think we're okay. In any case, at the moment when it comes to AI and when it comes to responsible AI, we are still working out a lexicon. So, and when AI comes into digital infrastructure and cyber resilience, I think it'll get more complicated. So there is definitely a need for some of that lexicon to be firmly put into place.
Please keep the mic, because I'm going to ask you a question. So what
I
novel?
hope it's not an interrogation.
No, it's not. Definitely not. I'm a lawyer, but I will not interrogate you. Not today. What novel threats actually should public and private organizations? Because obviously, Dr. Pawan, you have experience from both ends. So what novel threats should public and private organizations be looking out for? And what strategies or technologies should be implemented to protect against these emerging threats?
So you asked novel threats. So everybody knows about how ransomware is placed, and um, millions have been paid out in various countries. So fine. So the threats are ransomware. There is a huge threat of DDoS attacks. So ransomware, DDoS attacks, APTs residing in all our computers, ready to give information all the time back to whoever's placed them in our computers and in our servers. So, I mean, these are the standard threats that we all know about. But what's novel about some of them? I think we're looking at crypto jacking, which seems to be now, the more current threat which has come up as more and more people get involved with, cryptocurrencies. You'll get more and more of these problems coming up. And God forbid, when we have quantum coming in, then your blockchains are going to get compromised very easily. And crypto is going to face huge threats. So By that time, hopefully, crypto would have also evolved and blockchains would have evolved to take on the quantum threat. So there's the speed of compute that quantum will bring in will actually be a huge game changer. And it's not coming now, but it's coming in another maybe 5-10 years. If the US and China are at about 1200 qubits, India is just struggling with 14 qubits at the moment. But India is really working on it, and I think we'll be there very quickly, especially as soon as we get our cryogenics in place. Another one would be border gateway protocols. I think everywhere, every country has their own kind of protection for uh, border gateways, but these protocols need to be in place internationally. Otherwise, they're bound to get compromised. And if that happens, then you'll have a lot of data and a lot of information which either gets disrupted or gets diverted or is routed through somewhere else and then comes, so therefore fully compromised. Another threat, I think, is this watering hole attacks, which is very simple to understand. I mean, you just there are those places where everybody visits, and those are the areas that need to be protected. So somewhere or the other, we need to make sure that the usual watering holes are well protected, and we have our policies in place for that. I mean, there will be as many novel threats as there are brilliant minds in the net and on the dark net. So I really won't be able to give you something comprehensive on that, but this gives you a sense as to where we are heading.
Thank you for those insights. I think they're very interesting. Yes, please, Ronki.
So, General spoken from the technical side.
Very technical. I like it.
Yes. So I look at human error threat. Human capacity or human resources is usually key, whether organization, government, nation. So another threat based on the speed and advancement of technology will be human itself. And like Allah said, if you do not have adequate skills, you're as vulnerable. No matter what technical structure we put in, you still have the human interface. So I believe at public level, private levels, and even organizational levels, your human capacity needs to be updated, and sensitization of cyber security or cyber protection needs to be consistent. Is not something you should leave open, because once your human resource or capacity is vulnerable, you're as good as exposed. Then for the policy level, another threat I may see may be inflexibility in regulation and policies. So as government moving forward, it is expedient for us to rejig or rethink or reopen our minds to regulations. We know, like General Pond did also say, that we should be careful so regulation would not stifle innovation. The advancement is unprecedented, the speed. But we should also come up as, be responsive as policymakers to think outside the box. What kind of policies do we put in place? Yes, put up different structures, but how do we make sure it's not obsolete on arrival?
Yeah, obsolete on arrival.
Can I just,
Of course, yes, please.
can I just add on? She's absolutely right. The policy in itself, if you don't formulate policy, it's a threat. So, in some ways, the focus is very narrow at times because we tend to focus on protection. We tend to focus on disaster recovery. But there is very little focus because it requires money, it requires investment, it requires time, and it requires skill at the initial stages to bring it in. So I think Kaspersky is in this business. And I would really recommend that most of us, even though it would require time and effort to invest in the initial protection, it's really important. That has to be prioritized by governments, by companies, by the KMPs, the key management personnel, and has to be prioritized by the financial guys.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to maybe ask Ronke, from the perspective of a regulator, what metrics do you think should be used to evaluate the effectiveness of resilience standards? And how can organizations continuously improve their practices?
So, Helen, okay, so I can hear myself now.
Yeah.
So what metrics? I think it should be homegrown or industry grown for metrics, because we've had conversation talking about uniqueness of different experience. For me, our metrics will be measuring the quality and experience and residency recovery plan or disaster management ability or plans for different provide government itself. So how do you develop these metrics? It needs to be analytical and scientific, so to speak, because it has to be measurable and it's something that needs to be adaptive. The technical people will definitely play a huge role in developing these metrics, but as a policy regulator, we all should also be open to providing guidelines, so to speak, or coming up with frameworks that can be easily adopted and adaptable. Metrics should not be cast in stone. It should be something that you can review from time to time based on maybe advancement or change in technology or infrastructure expandment, or when you expand or update or upgrade your infrastructure. So these metrics, it's something for me that should be measurable, but it needs to be something that's acceptable, developed by stakeholders, so to speak. And we cannot undermine the role of the multi-stakeholder engagement in promoting common good.
Thank you for that. So, Allah, how can we then ensure that, and that's really because I'm tapping on your experience dealing with multi stakeholders engagements and all that. How can we ensure that all stakeholders, whether they're governments or they're private sector or civil society and so forth and so on, are actively engaged in the development of digital resilience standards? What role does each play? Because it's hard to handle. Everyone has got a different set of expectations or interests, and sometimes they don't agree. Oftentimes they disagree. So tough job.
So, look, I think we have touched upon this during all our questions and our discussions. Yes, every group has its own role, but again, I think it's a shared responsibility between all groups. But majorly, governments are responsible for shaping and setting the regulations and policies and making sure and frameworks that are needed to be digital resilience. And this responsibility of creating the laws and regulations, it shouldn't be only that government should do, but they should involve the private sector in the process, the civil society also in the process, to make sure that whatever they are coming up with from a regulation and policy, it is impactful and also can be executed easily. The private sector, when we look at the private sector, I think we know the private sector is the hub of innovation. They come up with the technologies, they are aware of all the new technologies and advancements that are happening. They are shifting the gears on the AI, on the computing power, quantum computing. So it's very important for them always to have that also conversation with the government. It's very important for them to keep updating from a cybersecurity perspective, and also support in the capacity building of human resources from a government perspective, also to have that support to the government. Again, also private sector can help a lot from a partnership in providing the right funds with the cooperation of the government. Again, as I said, I believe it's, yes, every group have its role, but it's a shared responsibility. And then we come to civil society and international organizations, the role of academia, the think tank, where the research, the hub of the research, the hub of how to think of the new innovations, how we can come up with the right set of standards with all supported, but with the right data. This all comes from the civil society. Last but not least, international organizations. Let's say that we are the connector. We are the one who can put everyone together, try to find the common voice, try to unify the effort, try to find the synergies, because again, we need to look at where are the synergies in all in every group, in the government group, even the private sector group and the civil society group, from a research aspect, from a funding aspect, from a policy and regulation aspect. So for this all to happen, it needs really an effective engagement between those different stakeholders. It needs cooperation and collaboration. It means that we need a continuous dialogue, an open dialogue. We have mentioned this before, we are facing a new or a very quick era of things that are very developing and accelerating very quickly. So if we do not put our hands together, we cannot, we will not be able to survive those changes, be agile enough and be prepared. We are looking at different building blocks, infrastructure as physical infrastructure. Doctor mentioned the data aspect of it. We mentioned the human resource aspect. We mentioned services. It's a huge, big ecosystem connected to each other.
Yes.
We cannot look at one building block by itself or one group by itself. Rather, we have to look at it as a whole.
Yeah.
And really adopt that effective communication with those different groups.
Thank you for that. So everything from the definition of the problem to coming up with the resources, whether it's thought leadership, research, or financial support, all the way to deriving at implementable solutions. We need that input from different segments of our ecosystem, right?
Exactly.
That's okay. I got that. If speakers have nothing else to add, I would like to move on to a next question. Dr. Yes, please. No, please jump in anytime. Thank you.
I'm sorry for always cutting
No, don't
in.
be.
Like what Alan said about effective engagement, because that's what has been around my head for a while. How do we move it from talks? We keep having all this conversation, IGF level, UN level, like you did say, GSMA, IETF, just name it. But how do we move it? And we also need to start focusing on conversation and ensure that we engage the right person and have it started. We did say earlier on that we just need to move, but how do we move and move effectively?
I totally agree with you, and I think this also goes to back when we talked about, let's have a definition of the problem.
Yes.
Then let's put an action plan on what do we need to solve. Then let's all sit on that table and try to solve it. Conversation for the sake of conversation and dialogue will not take us anywhere. It need really to be structured with a specific goal, with a specific outcome that we want to reach. And then after that, also with a specific measurement. Did our conversation and outcome and that we wanted, is it the correct one? Are we progressing in the right way? Again, with all this acceleration and the thing and how things are really changing quickly, we really need always to revise ourselves and see how effective the current solution that we are doing are really impacting the progress that we are aiming to.
Okay. I think also today's workshop and this dialogue that we're having, I was hoping um, um, to produce a white paper that sort of captures our key highlights from today's discussion, learnings. Well, I definitely learned a lot, and I think we're learning from one another. And with this white paper, I'm hoping that we could gain some traction as well from the international audience that we have, and from there, work towards that common goal to um, find solutions that we can develop in order to galvanize the entire galvanize everyone. And then from there, with these universal standards, be able to find ways that individual countries can customize for their own needs, right? So I think this is a good start. I am mindful of time. I have only about 12 minutes left. I would like to ask a couple more questions before we do a summary of our discussions today. So if I may, maybe turn to Dr. Pawan with this question. How can resilience standards be designed not just for immediate response, but also to support long-term recovery after a disruption? What mechanisms should be in place in order to ensure organizations can bounce back effectively?
I think the most important point here is to have a risk-based approach, and therefore going by the discussion that just took place between Ala and Adaronke, I would say clearly that we need to have a framework which can be put in place, which talks about a risk-based approach in various sectors where we have our digital infrastructure and the resilience that we need to bring into it. So going technically, of course, we would have to have a backup strategy. So wherever problems happen, we are able to recover from whatever losses have taken place. We have to have a constant updates. We need to be, much of the time we find that our softwares are outdated, our systems are outdated, and that's why there is loss of data, there is loss of, there is outage time, so to say. So we need to work around that to see that we are up to date when it comes to all our technologies. You can't underestimate the skilling aspect. So quite obviously, we have to bring people up to speed when it comes to the latest skills of this. So the main things I would say is following a risk-based approach, create a framework, make sure that you have your backups, make sure you have a rehearsed strategy to bounce back. And that rehearsal part of it needs to be done very carefully, because most of the time, again, organizations tend to feel that it's going to take time away from the real work, and therefore they just give it a bit of a lip service. And of course, the human aspect is the final aspect. So if people have to be trained, cyber hygiene has to be understood by everyone. They have to make sure that there is controlled access, that everybody understands the risks that the whole organization runs, how they personally run risks. I think we would be able to be in a situation where we don't suffer from these threats.
Okay.
If you allow me to add
Please,
this,
yes.
because thank you. You have mentioned very important point when we talk about recovery plans. I think it's very important to think of the single point of failures that every country and system have, and not only looking at it from a backup perspective, but also having diversity of technologies and systems. It's not relying on a specific vendor, not relying on one company by itself. You need to really think of having that diversity of system, and even looking at open sources, because this will really make you build a very solid backup plan, as mentioned, because it's very critical. We need to think out of the box regarding the regular recovery plans that we have, just having a backup, a disaster recovery from an infrastructure perspective, to really thinking of diversifying the systems, the technologies that we are using, and even looking at open source.
Yeah, I think the best example I can give of something like this, what we just spoke of, is what happened in Denmark 2023, right? So over a period of about 3 months, there were repeated cyber attacks on their national IoT critical information infrastructure, to the extent that even some of the dams or the dikes that they were working on, the dams that they were working on came under threat, and they went immediately into island mode. And it took them a long time to get back onto the net, but they had their systems in place, and literally people pulled out their cars and drove down and started operating systems physically. So quite obviously they had worked it out well, but these are recovery plans which need to be very firmly put in place so that you don't suffer outages. Okay.
Okay, we've got
Just
people from the audience pinging us to say we want to ask questions. So quick ones. Yeah.
10 seconds. Also, ensure that your infrastructure, you have redundancy and excess capacity, in addition to open source and not a single point of source. So it wouldn't hit you so hard if all these are put in place, and you also ensure that your infrastructure has enough capacity for redundancy. So if one goes down, you have that space like backup for your resilience.
Buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thank you, speakers. I'm gonna take a pause and take questions from the floor. I think some people pinged us in the Zoom chat to say that, yeah. I think this gentleman, can we pass him a mic? No mic, or we can pass you a mic. Yeah, please. Thank you. Shush it on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and congratulations for the great talk. My name is Dino Dellaccio. I'm the Chief Information Officer of the UN Pension Fund, and I'm here in the IGF. I'm involved in the best practice forum cybersecurity, and also leading the blockchain dynamic coalition on assurance and standardization.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Likewise. So I actually wanted to share a comment, because in my specific role in blockchain, what I'm facing is the lack of standards. And I want to be a little bit provocative in your case. I think that in the area of infrastructure resiliency, we do have universal standards, the ISO standards. For years, the whole series ISO 27001, the 22301, I'm also an ISO auditor, are very well established. And ISO is represented by the National Standard Institute of each country in its technical committee that also is open to various stakeholders. So is there here a risk to duplicate something? And instead to focus on it already exists, should we instead focus on threat models? Because the way to translate standard into those specificities that were alluded to before in each country is actually to look at which risk each country is exposed to, because not all countries are exposed to the same risk, and maybe focus on threat modeling and risk assessment rather than reinventing a new standard. Thank you.
I think it's an excellent question. Any takers? Please, yes.
totally agree with you. Everything you said made sense. So blockchain certainly would require standards, and I think we need to get down to defining those. But you talked about threat modeling and a risk. That's what exactly what I meant by a risk-based framework as well. So each one of these will have to, whether you talk about infrastructure resilience, whether you talk about cybersecurity, you talk about AI, in each of these and across these domains, we'll have to create frameworks, and that will have to be risk-based. The threat models you talk of will come from scenarios, and you need to keep building scenarios from where the threats emerge. And based on those scenarios that you game out, you'll be able to actually see what kind of frameworks will have to be built around them. So I totally agree with you on that. And the way to go about it is what I just said.
Anything else to add, ladies? All good? All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for that question. And remark, actually, that those are very good comments as well. Anyone else has got questions? Yes, please, sir. You need the mic? Could you maybe just share the mic? Thank you.
Am I being heard?
Perfect.
Okay, sure. Just to follow on on what was just raised there, and what Dr. Pawan said about a risk-based approach to establishing standards. And we're talking about universal standards here. The ISO standards came from somewhere. They were developed through some institutional framework. And the question would be, in taking the risk-based framework, are we identifying the institutions or the partners maybe that have to come together to develop the relevant universal standards for resiliency, that the various scenarios that we're identifying need, basically, right? I came in a bit late, so I don't know if you all talked about institutions or anything like that before, but maybe in answering some of this, we could try to identify the ways forward. Who are the people who would like to take action on these things? Thanks.
All right. So thank you for your comments. So I'll start with the last speaker. I recall one of the goals for this conversation is to come up with a white paper. We've identified, I believe that's why we're all here, we've identified that perhaps we do need a universal standard. How do we go about this? I recall that Allah also did say that once we identify them, we now move forward to practicality, and that's the next phase. We look at who are all the stakeholders involved. It's not going to be lopsided conversation, but this is getting the conversation going. Yes, we do recognize the ISO standards, and I like that you did say it comes, so the standards are, developed by institutions. So what are the roles of these various institutions? I recall also did say earlier on that we have different pockets, regional pockets, national pockets, industry pockets, having conversation, having standards to address, or even their own actions to address different issues regarding infrastructure resiliency. The fundamental point for me and conclusively is, do we need to develop standards or a framework or measurable actions that would ensure universal resiliency of this infrastructure? Yes. Have we seen trends move from just developing cybersecurity frameworks to cyber resiliency? Because these threats will continue to come, networks will break, human capacity may fail, or human error would occur. But how do we ensure that universally, what happened with CrowdStrike, what happened with the submarine cable for the African region does not repeat itself? Jenny, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. I have 1 minute left before some people have to run off. I will summarize our conversations in 1 minute and then we'll call it a day, okay? So basically, I think what we managed to discuss and agree on is that we do need universal standards which will form which basically are a common language that we need to develop. And of course, how do we do that? How do we do that will be that we start by asking ourselves what exactly is the mischief or the problem that we're trying to solve, the why, right? And then with these universal standards as a galvanizing, a f- well, a galvanizer for everyone, we also will have to tap on shared experiences. And that is where the multilateral network, regional and international cooperation from within the community, cross-jurisdictional learnings will come in to play. I think we could also benefit from some use cases, learn from past experience, and then also coming down to the local level to make sure that we have localized implementation and solutions, which will work for the individual countries in a customized manner. And of course, because and that's simply because nothing is one size fit all. And we also discussed some challenges that we could possibly be faced with and already are facing, which basically will be the very fast evolving threats that is facing the world today, from technical perspective or from a human element perspective, because humans can be the weak link, and which is why we also touched on capacity building. And of course, lastly, the policy element, which basically the usual problem is that, like what Ronke had said, it usually becomes obsolete upon arrival. So we have to try to avoid that and make sure that the policies, the frameworks that we put in place are agile enough to respond or be an effective tool that can help us to respond better to evolving threats, which are fast and furious. And of course, lastly, I think a takeaway, again, I'm saying this again, Dr. Pawan had said that we really just need to get started. We just need to get started. So what we'll do in terms of next steps is that we will compile today's discussions into a white paper, and hopefully this will serve as a guiding reference for countries, for regions seeking to enhance their digital infrastructure resilience. And of course, thank you everyone for being a part of this panel discussion and important conversation. And we really look forward to continuing our work together to shape a more resilient digital future. Thank you.